Welcome all to our launch event. I'm Erin Baker. I'm a professor of industrial engineering and the faculty director of ETI. We're very excited. We have about 300 people registered for the program today, and a great program with the Chancellor, Senator Markey, and a panel with national, local, and campus energy equity experts and practitioners. I would like to begin by acknowledging that UMass was founded and built on the unceded homelands of the Pocumtuck Nation on the land of the Norwottuck community. We recognize these lands and waters with which we are all interconnected. We acknowledge that the Pocumtuck peoples who were displaced by colonization and the Native peoples who still maintain connection to these lands today. We also acknowledge that UMass is a land-grant university and that the creation of UMass was financed by the sale of land from 82 different Native nations west of the Mississippi. We encourage you to learn more about the indigenous homelands on which we live and work. All right, transitioning to net zero will be a major challenge, technological, social, and political. But we have an even bigger challenge. Can we transition to an energy system that is not only clean, but equitable and just? The current energy system is inequitable. One example is that local pollution from power plants is much worse in areas with low income and people of color. Another example was work by a professor of electrical engineering here, Jay Tanasia. He used data science to investigate the big blackout in Texas last winter that killed more than 250 people. He found that the blackouts were 4 times more likely in communities of color than in communities that are predominantly white. We all have hope for a better future, but this future will only be equitable if we are very intentional about it. One example of the future is that subsidies for rooftop solar. Okay? These are paid for by everyone from their electric bills, but they don't go to everyone equally. They go to those who own homes with sunny roofs and who can afford the upfront investment. In order to achieve a long-term radical transformation of our energy system that embraces sustainability and equity will require convergence research. We organized ETI to allow us to perform cutting-edge, stakeholder-engaged research and education at the intersection of energy technology and social equity, in order to provide solutions and create opportunities for an equitable and just future. This connection between technological challenges and equity challenges is a gap. There are many institutes around the country looking at the science and technology needed for the energy transition. There are a growing number of centers who are focused on energy equity from a social science perspective, looking at the policy and the economics. What distinguishes our institute is the connection between these two. So I want to give you some highlights of some of our activities and accomplishments to give you a sense of what we mean by this intersection. So we have a $6 million NSF-funded program called Elevate, led by Matt Lackner in mechanical engineering. It's supporting PhD fellows and convergence research on energy equity and climate resilience. Projects include work on hurricanes and hydropower, on carbon capture technology and local pollution, and on how social networks interact with equitable research funding. At the end of the show today, you can watch a few slides to tell you a little bit more about these projects. And I want to highlight a couple of other particularly convergent projects. Computer scientists and economists teamed up to show how artificial intelligence methods that are used to prioritize energy efficiency subsidies may end up identifying high-income households as most in need unless they explicitly take equity into account. In another example, anthropologists and engineers are working together with the people in Holyoke, Massachusetts, to help them think through and plan an energy transition that is rooted in the needs of the community. Another project led by Michael Ash in economics is focused on measuring what matters. We want to figure out what people in communities are concerned about and then use technology to find ways to measure these aspects in order to promote change where it matters most. We're also working with undergrads. We're connecting undergrad researchers with faculty across campus and with each other on projects ranging from the history of renewable energy in New England to the ways in which climate will impact the resilience of our energy grid, to the impact of mining and disposal of key materials used in solar. Through another NSF-funded project, led by Professor D.V. in chemistry, we've put on a series of workshops to set the national research priorities at the intersection of energy technology and social equity. This work will be presented to policymakers and program directors in DC to help them design processes for a more equitable energy future. The energy transition presents a massive challenge, but it also presents an unprecedented opportunity to build an energy system that is not just cleaner, but more equitable and just. We know to do this requires great intention. It's not enough to develop cutting-edge energy technologies. They may not be adopted and they may not help equity. They may even hinder it. It's also not enough to develop policy, regulations, and business models for today's energy system. We know the future will look radically different and that technology can disrupt the best laid plans. We must work and innovate at the intersection of energy technology and equity. This is what ETI is doing. And with that, I would like to introduce Kumble Subbaswamy, or Swami as he is quite affectionately known on campus. He became the 30th leader of the University of Massachusetts Amherst in 2012. A physicist by training, Swami is an elected fellow of the American Physical Society and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and has spent almost his entire professional life at public research universities. Over the past 10 years, under his leadership, the university has moved up significantly in the national rankings, making UMass Amherst one of the fastest rising top-tier public research universities in the country. Given Swami's deep personal commitment to addressing climate change and his understanding of the university's responsibility to lead the world, he has strategically emphasized sustainability at every level of the campus. Reflecting this commitment, we are currently ranked 7th among national peer institutions for sustainability performance by the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. It is now my pleasure to pass the screen over to Swami.
Thanks very much, Professor Baker. Good afternoon, and thank you everyone for joining us as we officially launch the Energy Transition Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. And a warm UMass welcome to our panelists and guests. We're also thrilled that Senator Ed Markey is participating in today's launch. Senator Markey has made the issues of climate change and inclusion the center of his work on behalf of the Commonwealth. Through his efforts, he has become a national leader in the movement, and I cannot think of a better person to speak to the importance of the Institute. On behalf of the university community, I thank Senator Markey for his involvement and support. As a leading national public research university, we're committed to applying our excellence to tackle the issues of the day and the existential threat posed by the global climate crisis is at the forefront of these challenges. Consistent with goals set by the Commonwealth, as well as national and international organizations, Massachusetts is committed to achieving net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. Given the size of the university, we are the largest emitter of carbon among all the state agencies in Massachusetts. As the flagship campus of the Commonwealth and its largest consumer, we understand that our responsibility to help lead the net zero goal. And over the past 15 years, we have successfully reduced our emissions by almost 30%. and we remain strategically focused on that effort. While our work addressing climate change begins on campus, we're fully engaged on a global level across all of our disciplines, and especially at their intersections. We're pioneering interdisciplinary solutions to this critical and faceted challenge. The Energy Transition Institute is a vanguard for this effort. By working at the intersection of technology and equity, the Institute is using our expertise in the physical and life sciences, engineering, and social sciences, and the humanities to focus on facilitating a fast but also fair transition to a decarbonized energy system. This focus on working at the intersection of innovation and social justice is fundamental to our mission, our values, and our strategic goals. By identifying and supporting opportunities for interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary research, and by aligning these areas of strength with current and emerging external needs, we continue advancing our institutional commitment to improving the human experience. Today, as we officially launch the Energy Transition Institute, the university proudly reaffirms its intention to serve at the intersection of innovation and equity in service to all. Thank you again, and thank you for joining us.
All right, thank you, Swami, for your support for ETI and your ongoing support for the faculty, staff, and students who are working to push forward equitable innovation through research and teaching at UMass. Now, I'm excited to introduce remarks from Senator Ed Markey. He has long been at the forefront in addressing climate change and in addressing inequity. We appreciate his support for our work to advance an equitable energy transition and know that he will continue to champion efforts like this all over the Commonwealth and the country. Although Senator Markey wasn't able to join us in real time today, he wanted to be a part of this event. And so we will now share his remarks.
Hello, everyone. This is Senator Ed Markey. Thank you for welcoming me to the virtual launch of the Energy Transition Institute at UMass Amherst. I am so excited to join you today for the establishment of this new institute, which will be a powerful new force on one of the most important issues of our time: how to develop a clean energy future that leaves no one behind. UMass Amherst has long been at the forefront of energy science and technology. It has a history of groundbreaking scholarship on economic and racial injustice. The Energy Transition Institute will bring UMass Amherst's expertise and pioneering research to the intersection of climate innovation and climate justice. So I am so proud to be with you today because you will be an invaluable partner to communities across the Commonwealth, like our gateway communities that are working to ensure that our clean energy future means clean air for all, clean water for all, affordable energy for all, and good paying jobs for all. That's what a just transition looks like, a transition from the injustices of the past to a more equitable version that we create here in the present and the future. The students trained by the Elevate program will develop expertise in a wide range of fields, becoming the next generation of leaders on clean energy and equity issues. Every discipline, from anthropology to mechanical engineering, will matter when it comes to creating a just transition and a healthy future. That's why the Energy Transition Institute at University of Massachusetts Amherst is so important. The climate crisis will affect every part of our lives. We need a justice-focused set of solutions that will be able to tackle this interdisciplinary problem from every side. And that's what the Energy Transition Institute will bring to this fight for our future. Thank you again for having me, and congratulations on this momentous launch event. We need to create justice. We need to create greenhouse gas reducing technologies, we need to fight environmental injustice wherever it exists. That's your mission, and I'm very proud to be able to partner with you in this historic effort.
All right, it's wonderful to hear the support for our vision from campus leaders and national leaders. I'm going to hand it over in a moment to the panel. First, I want to note that we welcome questions from the audience during the panel through the Q&A feature of the webinar. For audience members in the old chapel at UMass, you may submit written questions. Please see Anna Goldstein in the back of the room. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Amilcar Shabazz, who will moderate the panel. Professor Shabazz is a member and former chair of the W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies here at UMass Amherst, and a member of the African Heritage Reparation Assembly in the town of Amherst. He's interested in energy transition as reparative justice in the US for communities of African descent. And he's also a member of the ETI Steering Committee representing the College of Humanities and Fine Arts. With that, I hand it over to you, Shabazz.
Thank you, Erin. I am so excited to be a part of this today, this launch, and really with the concept of envisioning a clean and equitable energy future. And that's a future that has to begin right now. I haven't asked the chancellor yet, but he's always been so supportive and generous with me in the past. But I hope to go to Egypt for COP27 this coming November. It's going to take place in Africa. It's going to take place in Egypt, Sharm el-Sheikh. And Africa has been facing an escalated climate-related disasters for years. This past summer, 6 million people in Angola faced starvation as a result of the worst drought the country has seen in 40 years. Also, all throughout East Africa, there have been cyclones and locusts that has destroyed agriculture. Africa has long suffered a lack of attention from countries and populations outside the continent. I raise this because the need for an equitable and clean energy future is a present existential issue right now. And we have joining us on this panel dynamic group of people with some interesting perspectives to bring to bear. I want them to introduce themselves, their own work, and I'm most excited with our first panelist to bring in to note her book on solar with justice. She's the co-author of Solar with Justice. One of the projects that I'm looking at within ETI right now is the question of solar ownership as reparations for Black ratepayers, along with Dwayne Brager, and bringing this to the African Heritage Reparations Assembly. So I'm so interested and invite our first panelist, Danielle Dean Ryan, to join us at this time.
Thank you so much, Professor Shabazz. It's an honor to be on a panel with you and with the Chancellor, and of course, with Senator Markey. As Professor Shabazz says, my name is Danielle Dean Ryan. I am the Director of Equitable Climate Solutions at the Bezos Earth Fund. I've been there since November. This is my third stint in philanthropy. And in addition to being in philanthropy, I work for a Black think tank called the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, and also served in the Obama administration at the Department of Energy's Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy Department, which at the time was a $2 billion operation and is going strong now. I've also had the opportunity to work on 2 campaigns to address diversity and equity in the environmental movement, both one called Green 2.0 and another one called the Climate Funders Justice Pledge. thank you so much for having me today. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for Professor Baker for your and others' vision for the Energy Transition Institute.
Thank you, Danielle. We want to bring in at this time Elvis Mendes to introduce himself.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Elvis Mendes. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I'm the executive director of Neighbor Massachusetts, and I use the He series. And I'm really excited to be in partnership with ETI. A little bit about Neighbor to Neighbor. We're a statewide people's organization, fighting to advance historically marginalized, the interest of historically marginalized communities, particularly working class people and Black and Indigenous people of color. We're based in gateway cities throughout the state, Worcester, Springfield, Holyoke, and Lynn, and headquartered in Boston. And we believe that in Massachusetts and our society as a whole, we're living through three really interlocking crises: the climate crisis, environmental degradation, our economic inequality and the widening problems that that's creating, and a deeply polarized political climate. And it's our belief that systemic racism upholds and reinforces these multiple crises. And so our organizing model and our work is really built upon what we call a power building strategy to engage a broad set of folks in the recruitment, training, and political education and mentorship of community leaders to work to advance their collectively identified interests. And so partnering with UMass ETI has really we've really been able to align our long-term objectives of tackling these different crises and do so in a way that creates, we think, new bases of power in these communities. We began partnering with the UMass ETI a few years back under the then Holyoke mayoral administration of Alex Morse, and it was on the heels of his Earth Day announcement to stop the expansion of a gas pipeline. And so we understood from the beginning that we wanted to build a process, a community-led process that resulted in an action plan that sought to have a more authentic and deep form of engagement with residents across the city. And since then, we've been engaged in a series of community listening sessions, focus groups, educational workshops, design sessions, really to build the foundation for the energy transition. And as I mentioned earlier, this for us has really been realizing a long-held desire. Our members, dating back to 2014, when we helped close the Mount Tom coal plant, have been really searching for and thinking about what does just transition look like for our cities and state, and how can we move forward a project like that. So we're tremendously excited to be part of this launch and continue collaborating with UMass ETI and building, hopefully, that future, beginning in the city of Holyoke.
Thank you, Elvis. And that reminds me of some years back when in the Chancellor's office, we brought the father of environmental justice, Dr. Robert Bullard, to campus as part of our Earth Day activities, and had at that time Mayor Alex Morse out as well. And it's part of a long-standing commitment of our Chancellor and of our campus to be involved in these issues of environmental justice, of climate change. And as an example of this, we have joining us now Cielo Sharkus, a graduate fellow of the Northeast Climate Adaptation Science Center. Will you come on in, Cielo?
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Cielo Sharkus, and I'm a climate justice scientist and engineer who focuses on equity and distributive justice. I'm an NSF research trainee here at the Energy Transition Institute. I fall under the Elevate program, which is elevating equity values in the transition of the energy system. I'm also the founder of HOPE, which stands for Human for the Oppositions of Pollutions and Emissions, a nonprofit that is centered around environmental justice and climate justice in New England. My research is focused on understanding the compounding effects that climate change has on traditionally underrepresented groups, food, water, and energy systems. Usually when we think of climate change, we envision weather, such as hurricanes, droughts, and lots of rainfall. Some of these effects, however, are invisible and can accumulate over time, causing issues to water quality and power generation. These issues disproportionately affect lower income, minority, and non-English speaking communities, resulting in the unfair distribution of pollutant burdens, health disparities, and environmental detriments. Climate change affects us all in different ways, but what if it could teach us how to adapt and prepare for our futures better? We could have safer cities, water to recreate in, and longer power generation that could last centuries as we adapt and change. This is a focus of my work with locally, historically marginalized communities, like the one I grew up in. One is Nuestras Raíces, a grassroots urban agriculture institution that aims to address inequality by training farmers to grow their own food and by distributing nutritious meals. My goal is that we empower farmers and community members to learn about climate change and its effects on rivers, streams, sediment, and water quality. My PhD dissertation, which is titled Engineering Justice, Past and Future Risks of Climate Change, is aimed at understanding how decades of legacy pollutants and future climate regimes will impact hydropower facilities, farming, and water quality in these environmental justice communities. I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much, everyone, including Aaron Baker, for inviting me to this program.
Thank you so much. We want to, before we begin to open up, and again, folks can begin thinking of your questions and sending them our way, but we really want to ask, what should engineers and scientists working on energy innovation keep in mind? How should they interact with historically marginalized, underserved, and overburdened communities in doing this work? Whichever one of you would like to jump on that first.
Sure, I can start us off. I would say that I think it's really important for folks coming in to understand the context, the history in any given community, and to be operating from a perspective of respect, for the knowledge held in the community, an orientation that's focused on the assets that that community holds, and really in the spirit of cultural and intellectual humility. Something that I think that folks at the UMass Community Service Learning Office and other places on campus have been long leading in that tradition. And as part of the UTI project, it's for us particularly heartening that there are anthropologists as part of the collaboration, because I think they bring in the folks, well, particularly who are part of this project, I think bring in the sort of a much needed perspective. And I'll just finish by saying that, I think it's really important for folks coming into that situation to operate from that spirit of curiosity and of not knowing. There's a saying, not knowing is most intimate. We think being able to relinquish a little bit of that attachment to being at all times the expert, but understanding the sort of political context, the policy decisions that help shape the world in which we're now navigating in and which perhaps we're conducting our research, I think is supremely important. And well, actually, I'll say one more thing, that this work is so much about building relationships and building them for the long haul. So understanding the importance of those relationships is foundational to building out any work. I think is something that folks should keep top of mind is to begin the collaboration.
And Professor Shabazz, if I might add something to that. You mentioned Dr. Bob Bullard, the father of environmental justice, and in so many ways, mainstream organizations are catching up to what he and others have been saying for a couple of decades. And it's nice to see that the UN, for instance, hailed him as a hero, last year as a climate justice champion. And we sit here today and have to really remember the context. We're sitting here at a time when it's not just the climate crisis. We're worried about war, and that's tied to who's using energy and who owns it. We're dealing with a pandemic where for all the brilliant science that there is, some folks won't wear a mask and doubt it. And we are sitting here today on the day when the Ipcc this morning, the International Panel on Climate Change, has released their latest assessment in stark terms that usually scientists studying the atmosphere don't use, right? About people being angry. And I'll give a quote that talks Professor Shabazz and others about how they put it this morning. One of the working group co-chairs said, by bringing together scientific and technological know-how, as well as indigenous and local knowledge, solutions will be more effective. And it is important to note this wasn't the chair of the justice group that said it. This was the co-chair of the entire endeavor. So while we are late, one thing we can be a little bit hopeful about is that people are seeing justice and equity as being intertwined with everything that we do.
Yeah, and if I could add, so I think that scientists and engineers should really focus on keeping the intersecting realms of social identity, historic injustice, and participatory decision-making really front and center to avoid the reinforcement of institutional oppression and continual social inequalities. So from conception to close, these concepts really must be integrated into the siting, design, and construction of energy innovations. I think that this would help prevent overburdened communities from having to come in and educate experts who may have neglected to dissect and disentangle these institutional forces that create and reinforce the inequalities. In addition to centering race, identity, and intersectionality, I think that integrating the overburdened into the discussion from conception is also critical. So making sure that everyone's voice is heard, given equal weight and value, it's critical to developing renewable energy that's truly equitable and just.
Thank you. That's great round on that. And I'm looking at the IPCC warnings, and it really brings up the crisis is now. People are having devastating effects now, which then raises the question: what should activists and those working on the social science of the energy transition keep in mind? How should they interact with scientists and engineers?
Well, I'm happy to give one example of that where Professor Baker and Anna Goldstein and others have been pioneering. We cannot sit in our silos. And one of the initiatives that UMass Amherst has been a part of, and the reason for this launch of the Energy Transition Institute was held last year, where they brought together the leaders from the social sciences and from the various technical sciences and said, we have to figure out newer, better ways of working together. And we have to have in the room not just people from different disciplines with PhDs, but people from different lived experiences of these problems that we say that we are trying to solve. And that means the discipline and patience of having to get past what a particular vocabulary word might mean in one setting in engineering versus others. When you talk to financial folks and you talk about equity, they hear something different. And so it requires exactly the kind of effort that ETI is looking to solve, to figure out how no one can call themselves quote unquote educated after leaving coming to UMass without having seen how their work interacts with others, and without meeting someone like Elvis and understand what's happening, in their backyard. So those are a couple of things I'd offer.
Any others from the other side of the equation? Then let me direct something more specifically to Cielo. How has your engagement with community members affected your engineering research process and outcomes?
Thank you for this question. I think it's really interesting the way we talk about community, especially when some of us have been in the same position as the community itself. So I grew up in a historically underserved, overburdened community with lots of cases of environmental asthma, lack of renewable energy opportunities to transition, with a lot of legacy pollutants and water quality issues as well. When I first began my educational journey to become a climate justice engineer, I've thought about this question a lot. And from the beginning, I learned that working with the community would be essential towards understanding the needs, wants, and experiences of the community. Because whatever issues I solve or analyze, they would really be moot without thinking about what people are actually going through to live through this. A lot like Danielle said, thinking about the storytelling aspect and about people's lives. So who's going to live through this flood, who these pollutants spills? This has shaped my research tremendously, because the most valuable thing to me is not data or results. The most valuable thing to me is really lived experiences, storytelling, shared camaraderies, and joy. That's not something you see every day in engineering. And when I say joy, I mean the true joy that comes with solving a problem that a community back home, your friends and family might be struggling with, or that you're helping other people solve problems that their families or our families have been facing for generations. Before Nuestras Raíces, I worked with the community in Fitchburg on a similar project. In Fitchburg, there was a really interesting issue about the water quality of their river, which a lot of people played in and went swimming in. There was trash, oil, gas, and other pollutants there that would flow into the river after heavy rainstorms, including sewage overflow. To combat this, I worked with a group of engineers actually in an elementary school. So we worked with 5th grade students to create a workbook that would help inspire other children and adults to become stakeholders in their future in the environment. We presented our results in our workbook in a science cafe. We gave badges to kids and created videos so that everyone could be a part of the initiative, even if they weren't directly involved with any research. This is a really core memory to my story. It helped me understand how community engagement is important for creating physical outcomes that positively benefit the environment. We knew quantitatively that our efforts were improving the water, but what was much more important to me was that all the community members felt involved and empowered to be part of our team. They felt like we really took to heart what was the issue and what was important to them, which was empowering the children through learning and teamwork. Now that I'm much more advanced in my degree, I'm actually graduating in about 2 years. I make sure that whenever I design a model or whenever I run calculations, that these are not just black and white values. They're intrinsically connected to a community who might be facing something very scary in the coming years, something that they might not understand, and that their experiences and stories need to guide where my research goes. This also goes hand in hand with my outcomes. My research and the results are my responsibility. It's my responsibility to educate the community. It's imperative that whatever I discover, whatever I publish, it goes to the people who really need it. And that's why I'm so excited for the Energy Transition Institute, because we work so closely with the community to help uplift and empower voices to be a part of all stages of energy transition and research, especially in Holyoke.
Excellent. Elvis, for you, how do energy and transition and environmental justice issues intersect with other problems faced by communities that you work with?
Thanks so much for the question. I think it's something that has become more popular as of late. Audre Lorde's quote that people do not live single issue lives. Something that I think is being held more dearly by folks doing movement work. And I think it's important and applicable here, right? Our folks are experiencing energy and environmental issues in a variety of different ways, right? From their increasing, energy bills to having to perhaps their families being displaced because of hurricanes, Katrina, Maria, to issues of just how their lived environment, day to day, walk to school, walk to work, looks like and functions, right? Whether it's a waste transfer station in the case of Holyoke that's built on Main Street, or issues of lead in the water or environmental mold in schools, as happens in Springfield and in Holyoke. I think it's really important to keep in mind how folks are facing these crises on multiple fronts. And I'll just to also sort of loop back to the question that you posed earlier around how activists can think about this. I think it's really important when thinking about that to hold that it is the role or it is part of the work for folks engaging in movement work to think about how we're translating, connecting, using language-based communication, using symbols, using our own credibility in the community and other tools essentially to be able to bridge some of the existing divide and help folks meet people where they're at and help people understand how these issues are connected and how they're they're already being confronted on a daily basis and if not met with the importance and urgency that they merit, then they're going to become worse in the future.
It's powerful. I remember in high school reading things that were coming out, the Club of Rome reports, the end of affluence, the coming dark ages. These were some of the books we were reading that were coming out when I was in high school. And, there was always this idea of the technological fix that, we worry about these things, but eventually there's a technological fix that comes along. And I think we're now beginning to have to really grapple with that way of thinking is really flawed. We've got some good questions coming in. So first one is, I am a white anti-racism activist and trainer. How can I best be an ambassador to influence people regarding environmental racism and how it affects everyone. Where is the best place to find science to back up the stats regarding marginalized communities and climate disaster? Kind of a two-part question. Anyone want to take any part of those? How to be an ambassador, and yes.
Yeah. I will let Elvis take the ambassador one because I think he's better suited for that one. But I will say when it comes to the stats, it's a hard question to hear, to tell you the truth, because it feels like the stats are everywhere, and part of what's missing are the mechanisms for folks to get access or read them in ways that resonate for them without even having to go looking. But one good place to start is the Ipcc report itself. Another good place to start is Bob Bullard's website. And if you type in any city that you're in the word environmental justice, if you don't come up with an organization that's in that area, then maybe go further out and type the name of the state and environmental justice and climate justice. Just like the fact that we are, as humans, altering the climate is settled science, it is settled science that it's not just the poor that suffer the most from climate change. But even after you control for income, race is a critical determinant of impact on climate. And I'll quote one of my favorite scholars and mentors, Professor Manuel Pastor. He's a professor at USC. And he said he came home to his grandmother excited and said, I just, I'm doing my PhD and I now have the data to prove that, poor people and people of color suffer the most from air pollution. And she said, and I'm gonna not do this, the Spanish well as he said it, but she said, Manuelito, everybody knows that. And so it reminds me of so many scholars of racial justice, and you'll be more familiar with this than I am, Professor Shabazz, when we talk about the fact that racism gets in the way of doing the work, because we want to be doing the work to solve the problem, and instead we're busy trying to get the stats to state the obvious, because we have to do that. And one of the people that's also producing great stats is right at UMass Amherst. In my prior roles, I've had the opportunity to fund work by Professor James Boyce and Professor Michael Ash, who were both mentioned, and go to their work and you'll be able to see which companies put the most pollution in the communities that are already suffering the most. And I'll turn to Elvis and Cielo to take the one about how to be a better partner if you're white, because I know you've both seen white allies doing a good job and white allies sometimes not doing a good job.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one part that comes with anti-racism and empowering community members is making sure that you're also propelling those voices upwards. So making sure that you're not getting in the way of other people's message getting out there. Another one is also education, which is something I've really been passionate about and involved in ever since I've been at Worcester Public Schools. And so when I first started my PhD, I learned all about the world of publicly available data. So the Massachusetts Department of Energy and Environmental Affairs actually has their own GIS files that you can download that demonstrate where all of the environmental justice communities are. So you can do it right now. I can just link it after this meeting, but you download it and you just quickly find out where some of the most environmental detriments are all concentrated. And that is something that you can share with your community members, anyone that you work with, and then start overlaying with other data, such as like historical pollution, air pollution, anything. And it will really give you a stark view of how environmental racism is in our own homes. And this is something that really startled me because I didn't think that it would be so drastically different from one town to another in somewhere as equitable that I thought was Massachusetts. And another thing about it is empowering people to learn things that are easily accessible, like GIS. All of the climate data and all the research that I use is publicly available. A lot of it just comes down to understanding and working through all of that data.
Elvis, did you want to jump in on the ambassador question?
Sure, I'll just add a little bit more, which is, and I agree with everything that was said. That just, I think so part of it, it's so fundamental, and just really listening and allowing for the leadership of folks from those communities to surge up, and investing in trust and relationship building, I think is, key part of that. I would also say that, to what was mentioned earlier, there is a question there, I think, about even our framework and our approach, right? Which I think oftentimes is one in which, folks conceptualize as sort of like we need to solve the climate crisis and then we'll solve issues of racial justice. And that is an incorrect approach in my, assumption. In my sense, I think really need to think about that as, okay, well, racial injustice, among others, are tools that disempower our communities. How are we able to, work through and see these as sort of points of departure, points of where we can work together to then help dismantle and fight through these larger issues. So I think there's a question there around sort of how we're approaching the problem itself, which I think is important to explore. And I'll just say that there's some folks who, particularly in the last couple of years, have done some really great thinking around that. Ian Haney Lopez, Set Shenko Osorio, et cetera. There's an entire framework that's being developed around how we're thinking about race and class, particularly in the context of climate.
Danielle, we have a money question. What is the role of funders and philanthropists in moving toward a more just energy system? What is the role of foundations and federal agencies? However you might want to take that.
You knew that was coming. Here, broadly speaking, of the phases that we've seen when it comes to environmental philanthropy. When more years ago now than I might like to count, was new to philanthropy, and I was in my 20s. I was seeing what Elvis was seeing, which is, hey, environmental justice organizations, we big mainstream green groups who have the most money, you need to support us to help go and tell elected leaders to pass policies that will save your people from climate. And the environmental justice leaders said, where is the equity woven into your policy? And they said, we'll solve that later. First, we have to address climate. I'm pleased to say there's been a shift in at least that thinking. One reason why is that environmental justice organizations had enough political power in California. They always had the facts, but they grew enough political power in California to be able to get a flawed policy to have some environmental justice recommendations in it. And I was proud to support some of that work. And that resulted in a lot of money going to environmental justice communities, because by law, it was written into the law. If it's not written into the law, forget it. We can't solve problems waiting on the goodness of people's hearts only. And then you had a couple of oil companies that came along that didn't like the climate justice law, and they miscalculated. They thought, we know people of color don't like this law. And so we're going to come in and say to them, this climate law is going to be bad for your jobs, bad for your equity, bad for your utility bill, etc. And so we're going to go to the ballot and we're going to overturn the entire law, right? And the leaders of color, who at that point were getting 2% of dollars from a lot of the big funders, 2%, okay? In a state that was already close to minority or just over it. They said to the oil companies, oh, isn't that sweet? You really care about my jobs and my bill and what is happening to my communities. Show me another. And so they made a strategic decision to team up with a lot of the mainstream environmentalists that they had been fighting with to say, let's push back on this law, not just with words, but because of the environmental justice measures we got into the law, money is starting to flow to our communities. So it is imperfect, but we're seeing some good happening. And it was a wake-up call for many of the environmental funders that, oh, look, if we hadn't written these equity provisions into the law that we're delivering today for environmental justice communities, these environmental groups wouldn't have been able to say, they might have still said it, but not with as much credibility, money is being delivered to our communities, right? And that law went down in flames. The oil companies lost. And what we've seen is that philanthropy sometimes funds environmental justice groups when something that they want is on the line for defense, and don't as much turn to them for brilliant ideas and for offense. That's shifting, but I'll tell you this, in the role before I was here at the Bezos Earth Fund, I was consulting to an organization called the Donors of Color Network. And they looked at more recent numbers on where climate funding has come. And I'm no longer in my 20s. I'm not going to tell you what I am, but I'm no longer in my 20s. So it's been a while. And they found that they looked at 12 very big funders that were already funding some climate justice, but said, you measure what you care about, right? What are you funding overall? What percentage? The number was 1.3%. Even if you quibble with the methodology, it was abysmal, okay? So because of the protests with George Floyd and the racial reckoning that is happening now, we are seeing more and more funders looking to scale up the amount of support they're giving to environmental justice groups. So I am very happy to say that, for instance, the Bezos Earth Fund is funding people like Dr. Bob Bullard, is funding and just hired last week Dr. Cecilia Martinez, who is leading one of the leaders for the Justice 40 initiative under President Biden, and has put so far $300 million in. So more needs to be done. We still need more pressure, but there is change happening.
So we've got many other great questions that have come into the Q&A, but I think I have to turn the mic over to Erin around the call for action. Is that right, Erin?
That's right. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Cielo, Danielle, Elvis. That was wonderful. So I'll clap. Hope people are clapping at home. That's the one thing about these remote. You can't tell that it was really wonderful. Thank you, Shabazz, for hosting. And thank you, everyone, for attending. We're very excited about our work to build a cleaner and more just energy system by centering equity in science and technology, and by bringing people together across campus, across the Commonwealth, and across the nation. I want to mention one upcoming event for those of you in Massachusetts. The Energy Transition Symposium will be held here on campus on May 3rd, and will showcase energy transition research and campus climate action. So building a more just energy system goes way beyond what we can do alone. A vision like this really takes a village, and in fact will take the whole nation coming together. So we need your help and would love to find ways for everyone to get engaged. We need scholarships and fellowships for our diverse students. We could use funding to turn the campus's carbon mitigation plan into a living lab, engaging faculty, staff, and students in the creation of new knowledge as the campus transitions to clean energy. We need an endowment for our institute to maintain a lasting commitment to the communities we work with, and particularly to recruit and retain diverse staff to be part of our work. We would love to have an industry affiliate program. We're looking for a few organizations to help us design a program that brings together academic and industry experts in a way that benefits firms, students, and society. We're looking to expand our community partnerships and collaborations. And so if you are interested, please reach out to us. We're always looking for graduate students. for our Elevate PhD program to work with wonderful students like Cielo, as well as students who are interested in the Masters in Sustainability Science, or MS3. We're looking for undergrads at UMass, at the 5 colleges and beyond, who are passionate about energy equity. And you can come from any field, as you've seen from a lot of our examples. Contact us and see how you can get involved. Hey, for everyone, if you want to engage with us or talk about opportunities, please reach out to us at our email address, eti@umass.edu. If you stay on for a couple minutes after I sign off, you'll see some highlights of activities and can see the contact information written down. Together, we can envision a clean and just energy future. Thank you all very much.